Hey guys, Wolfie here. This is the final ever video for the City of Final Fantasy Opera Omnia section of the channel. The channel's not going away, it's just I will not be making any more DFFOO videos after this one, so this is the 42-month review, quote unquote, so I will no longer be playing this game. But either way, for these types of reviews, I was doing these once every 6 months. And how this goes, it's what I likes, dislikes, or areas of concern, suggestions for improvement, and final thoughts. So with that, the usual disclaimer applies. Any opinion in this video is my opinion only. So like I said, it's been an interesting ride, that sort of thing, so I'm just gonna cut straight to it. So I'll be back. Actually, you know what? Screw that. I'm just going to go into the likes right now. Now, some of the likes I particularly enjoyed are, and mind you, some of these go into all the main three, the likes, dislikes, and areas of concern. So, what I particularly am enjoying, or was enjoying, I should say, was the fact that the communication on the overall spectrum has improved. And improvements in communication is probably going to help retain the player base, if not keeping people around. Now, sadly for me, I do have to reveal a bit of the reason why I will no longer be playing. It's just I have too much in real life stuff going on. I won't have time. But anyway, outside of that, the communication being improved, that's really good. I like that. And there are varying features that are global first, where it's like, okay, this is really good. My personal favorite would have to be the reduced timer in co-ops. It used to be 60 seconds, now it's at 20. I mean, yeah, the reason why I like that is because you actually have more time to utilize whatever support item you have in possession. I particularly enjoy that. Now, with Vivi being a global first, and I'll do a pause. Vivi here is in fact a global first LD. And what I mean by here is that at the time, the fact that they were doing LD first as opposed to global first characters, the fact that this one got his LD first on global, that was a really good decision in my opinion, because you're talking about a member of the Cursed Six getting something that really could help him on a long-term scale. So that I particularly enjoy. And then if you're looking at some of the Twitch streams as of late, it's good because, you got people, finally putting their foot down on certain aspects, which is something that's desperately needed. Now, regarding that as well, you're talking about global following JP's footsteps in the sense of realizing the tier 3 armor. I particularly enjoyed that they followed footsteps, that way, we, the global player base gets to try it out. Now, there was a recent event within the summer festival of all the Gilgamesh. You get Gilgamesh tokens, you get really hard to obtain items. That was freaking genius. And that should be implemented more often. The reason why that is there are people who have yet to get anything for tier 3 armors. They can finally have the opportunity to grab one for their favorite character. I mean, I used mine on Celeste because waifu is laifu, and Celeste is my waifu. Now, speaking of the summer festival, I particularly enjoyed the fact that there was nothing that came early in the format of weapons or reworks. That was particularly good because you're talking about the 2 prior summer festivals where at some point Kane got a rework early. And I'm not saying that part in a bad way. It's just something that's worth pointing out for those who don't like Kane from Final Fantasy IV. So it's one of those things, this is that type of mix-up, that was particularly clever and a good idea in my opinion. Because you're talking about not playing favorites. It kind of supports that evidence in that direction. Now, regarding and also ties into a little bit of decision making, I'm like, okay, they really are starting to mix things up. Now, what I'm kind of surprised here, and this is even more recent, was that Global came back with global first characters. Now, the reason why I said recently, because core for Final Fantasy 15, this guy over here, he became the third global first character. And for being like in tune with gender aspects, is that he is the first male global first character, because you look at the prior two global first characters, Beatrix and Aranea, they're both female. So it's a good thing, a little bit of a mix up in that regard. Now, with that being said, we're going to go into the final item in my likes list. And believe it or not, it looks like Global is seemed to putting more efforts into social media in the regards of, people to interact on Twitter and or Facebook, and everybody gets goodies. That is something I particularly enjoy, because it's like, this is something that JP has been doing for some time, and it's about time Global got on board with that. With that all being said, we're going to go into my dislikes and areas of concern. Now, regarding some of the communication and some of the Twitch streams, this is where I am very concerned. Because you're talking communication, granted it's improved, but it's like, I do feel it is a bit of a comes and goes sort of thing. And I'm like, And then there are other cases where it's like, certain things have been going on, and it takes the development team a lot longer than anticipated to address it, which I am still worried about to this day. Because it's like, if something pops up, there should be something being said by somebody sooner than later. And for the first time, I'm actually going to include some JP stuff in here, because unfortunately for Global, these are spoilers. So you have been warned. Now, Vincent from Final Fantasy VII. Now, he is a sequel made because of Dirge of Cerberus. Now, at first, and this is one of those where I have to change, it's a bit of an instance where it's like I had to change my stance. Now, I was a little concerned, with, him being a global first LD. But with that being said, this is something I am far more forgiving the game for now, because you're talking a potential first plus character, because he is, for those of you who are on Global, you remember that whole token shop where it was just the main protagonist from like varying games. He was on that list, if memory serves me correctly, on the map. So it's one of those things is where, if you really think about it, at first, there were a bunch of people, myself included, were concerned about his LD being first on Global. Now time has passed. It's actually a good idea that Global did. So this goes into an area of concern where it's like, okay, let me think about this. Yeah. But you cannot say this. You cannot say the same thing with Balthier. Now, the reason why this one is a quote-unquote victim of controversy is because of one other character. If I could get her on the screen, it's because of Fang. Now, Fang and Balthier was like a bit of a subject of some degree of controversy. Fang on the JPN and Balthier on Global. Now, Balthier was the first during the month of February to be an LD first character. Now, we're going to separate the aspect here of like kits without the LD. Now, Balthier has more uses of his entire kit minus the LD. We're looking at the current state of Global for both of these characters. So, he already has his 80/80 awakening, that sort of thing. So with him, he got his LD first on Global. but he had more uses of his entire kits than Fang. Fang was in more need of the LD first on Global because hers recently came out on JP with her 9090 Awakening and her secondary rework. But the reason why she's considered a victim of controversy is because she was overlooked for 2 years by JP. And that is really bad when you look at, and this is another dislike of mine, the balance of the game. Because you can't really focus on too much of certain characters, and you're leaving people like Fang in the dust for 2 years. Now, Sarah for Final Fantasy 13-2 on JP, and in some cases on Global, is that Sarah is also another victim of controversy. But I'll get to her in a little bit. So the thing is, like, the game really should be sitting on players for 2 years because it's going to draw people away from the game and it's drawing people to the game. I mean, some of the numbers where both platforms, and it looks like they're working as one, they reached 9 million downloads of the game. And if you're looking at that number at this time compared to some of the others, that's actually bad. Because you're talking about the numbers not being there. The revenue is a bit of a question mark because if you look at mobile gadget games, you're talking different teams, different budgets, different sources of revenue. And if DFFOO is being touted as a free-to-play friendly game, this will hurt the bottom line no matter how hard you deny this. So the thing is with Fang and her recent rework, they fixed some aspects, in my personal opinion, of her longevity. You know, she's got more uses of skill 1, skill 2. They tweaked her additional ability to where it has a longer duration. Her EX is pretty solid. But the thing is like she does need a third rework, and they do need to give her some format of skill use conservation. Because that's something I don't see her having with that secondary rework. And that is a spoiler for Global. And I do want to add here with her secondary rework that her skill 1 and her EX ability are now AoE HP damage wise. They do retain the whole aspect of launching on skill 2 under certain conditions. And I believe she can launch on the EX ability as well. So she has more ways to launch enemies, and we're not limiting it to just skill 2. She has it on free will with her EX ability. Now, another aspect of her being a victim of controversy, I spotted a comment on Twitter being along the lines of her being compared to Kais and Sid Reigns. Sid Reigns will be coming to Global at a later date, but the fact that you're comparing somebody to people within the meta, it's really heartbreaking in the overall spectrum because it's like it kind of implies, in my opinion, that people should be going after the meta where you have varying games like DFFOO, whatever, that say to play with your faves. And you're doing comparisons like that, it's going to imply that you want people to go after the meta as opposed to the faves. And the problem with that is that meta will not get you through every single situation, where you need to have a mix in your roster that makes you get through every situation, not just the meta. But that is just my personal opinion. Now, the reason why I still feel to this day she should have gotten her LD first on Global is because her 80 Awakening, she's among the very last to get it. Now, she gets her 90 Awakening, which comes with her LD and her secondary rework early on, but it's one of those where, again, unfortunately, it came too late. And for Global, this will probably not sit well. Whereas for both here, he actually has more skill uses outside of the LD than Fang does. Meaning that he could have been without his LD for some time. Now, another aspect of controversy that really is concerning is that Null, and this is a major spoiler for Global, he actually gets his burst weapon. Now, the reason why I held off on Sarah for this one is because, according to both Square Enix, not DFFOO, and the Wikipedia page, is that Null's not the main character in 13-2. Now, It was brought to my attention that Null is seen in the opening scene before Sarah, and this is alongside Lightning, but the thing is that it was super brief. If you really take a look at that opening scene in 13.2 very carefully, now granted, Lightning and Null both show up very briefly before Sarah does. Now, people forget the bigger picture of that opening scene, and then you're talking about the vision Sarah's been having. Null and Lightning appear in one of them. And one could also argue that Sarah is a far more important character throughout the entire trilogy than Lightning and Null put together. And the reason why that is because the Lightning's actions. Are they really through Lightning's eyes, or are they through Sarah's eyes? And this is something that, with Null being a major player in 13.2 with an even smaller role in Lightning Returns, is that DFFOO may as well just come out and say this is AU, or we're also giving the major players in respective entries their burst weapons, not just the mains. And that's something that DFFOO needs to come out and say. Because until they do, it's like I really just cannot trust the developers. It's just like, you say this, but you're doing something else. Now, the only two characters I feel justified in getting their burst weapons, despite not being mains, are Gilgamesh and Locke. Now, with Mackinac from Type 0, that is a bit up in the air, depending on the true antagonist of Type 0, which is Sid Augustine. I can't pronounce that person's last name correctly, so forgive me. So Mackinac is a bit of a question mark because of the lack of the true antagonist for Type 0. But you look at Locke and Gilgamesh, it's more justified because you're talking about Final Fantasy VI lacking a single protagonist. Now, it's been argued, in certain aspects, I have a previous video mentioning of Celeste being confirmed by Square Enix to be of equal importance to Terra. Now, Locke can be seen as the same way, the equal importance to Terra factor. Now, Locke is actually on the NT roster, whereas Celeste, and this may shock some people, she actually made an appearance in World of Final Fantasy. And in the sequel, she has an ability used in there as well. And you're kind of wondering, what skill does Celeste have in World of Final Fantasy when she helps out? It's Runic. It's her trademark move. But either way, I do feel Celeste is a future burst weapon candidate because of her being equal to Terra in importance to the events of 6. Now, with Gilgamesh, he actually has, appeared in varying Final Fantasy entries, and due to the fact of him being a recurring character in the entire franchise, that is another justifiable reason for him to get his burst. This is in addition to Gilgamesh being in the Dual Death Sim roster, not NT, because NT, they stopped bringing in new characters for one of the reasons being really poor sales of the game. But the thing is with Null, I don't feel that's a justifiable move. Again, he is a very major character. He is considered the rival to Caius, but even though, and this is despite the fact that Lightning is the destined rival to Caius. So you're talking about a development team that may have gotten some of their information wrong. And the thing is with Null, the reason why he is a victim of controversy is because there are quite a few, myself included, were asking why Null and not Sarah. Sarah's confirmed to be the protagonist of 13.2, not Null. And unfortunately, this kind of comes down to a major dislike as well as a major area of concern. Meaning that people were defending DFFOO for this decision. And it shouldn't be. And in certain areas of life, you are allowed to question the things you support. If you don't ask the questions, that means you are blindly supporting the decision without really looking into the matter, in my opinion. I am bringing this back to core because it's not so much him itself, but it is something kind of very surprising with the fact that they're returning with global first characters. Now, this is one of those things I do feel that DFFOO needs to make its mind up on the matter. Because you can't say you're no longer doing it and you bring it back. Because that inconsistency, like right there, you say you're not going to do anything anymore, but you bring it back. That means that it's inconsistent in the sense of like, what you're wanting to do. And it may turn some people off because with Core, another victim of controversy in my opinion, but it's the fact that you're talking about certain entries getting more love more often than others. Now, Rydia, this is a little bit more recent. She just got her LD on JP. During the Divine Leviathan, if memory serves me correctly. But the fact is, like, she is compared to a recently released character on JP. Should be coming to the global on a later date. The character I'm referring to here is Layla from Final Fantasy II. And it's like, you got the comparisons between those two characters, and I'm like, come on. Is it really worth playing the game if you're constantly comparing certain characters to others? I mean, it is somewhat asinine to have that type of mentality. I mean, come on. Now, we're going to go into the suggestions for improvement. Now, one of the things that DFFOO really needs, and I've been saying this for a long time, is that they need compatibility with Amazon devices. Because right now, you got games like FFBE outdoing you in your numbers. And by that, the number of downloads, revenue, all that. It's like, you can't limit it to like certain devices because, in all honesty, it's like you're saying that you have to have this in order for that. It's not a good message. And having a YouTube channel for just DFFOO, FFBE already has something like this going on. There is no reason for DFFOO not to have their own YouTube channel. Because you're talking about additional revenue that you're missing out on. Now, another thing here that FFBE has, and I'm just bringing this sort of thing up for reference for the record, is that DFFOO needs to have some format of incentive to bring back players, because as of right now, you have like a bit of a turnstile, a rotation of like people coming and leaving. This is not going to go down well for the long-term run. Now, the one suggestion I'm going to make, it's for global only, and the reason why I say this is because JP had something like this already going, is that global should have a raffle on social media, Twitter, Facebook, for people, take part in this, and then you could win something like burst weapons, the gear to realize armor, that sort of thing. JP has something like that going on. Global has not. And then when it comes down to global first stuff like LDs and or characters, DFFOO really needs to be consistent on it, because again, what I just said not too long ago about not doing any more global first characters and then bringing it back with Core, it's like, I don't feel that's like, you're going back on something. I mean, a little consistency would be really beneficial. And another thing here, when it comes to like matters, when it comes to like major issues, and I forgot to mention this in the areas of concern, but I'm going to bring it up now, is that addressing like the major issues and doing the same like apology rewards, it's going to make DFFOO look really bad, because it's like some players may say is DFFOO not trying or not caring. And I have to bring this up again for reference reasons only, is that FFBE, anytime a major issue comes up, they actually adjusted the rewards to the nature, to like that current state of the game at the time. DFFOO keeping things the same, it's not going to make things, not going to give it a good look. And I say this from a business perspective, strictly from a business perspective. Now, another area of improvement would be to implement social media more often to make sure the player base gets goodies. Because, again, if JP is doing something like this already, the Global has no reason not to do the same thing. That's how I feel. And then with the balance of the game, there does need to be some improvements there, because you can't have certain characters gain, or I wouldn't say certain characters, but certain games gain more love than others. And it's a really doggone shame. Because you have to bench people for as long as Fang has been benched, and Sarah to some extent, that sort of thing. It's just a real shame that way. There's nothing I really can say about that all in all. Now, with my final thoughts on the matter, let me check my time, because I am waiting for somebody for an IM I'm expecting. So I just had to check the timer real quick. So here are my final thoughts. Now, DFFOO is one of those games where, it's good for what it is, but there's definitely some improvements that need to be made in surprising areas. Now, if the balance of the game were better, not giving certain entries too much love, and then do a little love here, then do a little love for an unexpected entry, that sort of thing. If it's something like a little bit of love at a time, it's just people can have a better chance of playing with their favorites instead of being shoved with the meta. And I do feel that DFFOO needs to come out and say that this is an alternate universe, or AU for those of you who write fan fiction. The reason why I feel this needs to come out as alternate universe, because again, with No being a burst weapon recipient and not Sarah, and this is especially the case if Sarah never gets her burst weapon at all, which makes the whole questioning of Noel getting his burst a lot more justifiable, because you really can't say that, we're doing the mains and you're giving it to major players and not just the mains. It's DFFOO needs to make that type of statement, because honestly, like I said, I simply cannot trust him at this point for that reason. Now, DFFOO not doing anything to bring back players, again, this hurts the longevity, because again, FFBE has done something like this already. And if you look at some of their numbers, they're at around 45 million downloads. That is easily way more than DFFOO at this point. And one of the things that, that's going to hurt this game in the long term is the lack of consistency in some areas. Because you're talking about, we're no longer going to do this, but we're going to do that. It's they should be applying it into some other areas as well. Because honestly, you're not going to have a player base for too much longer if you continue to be inconsistent in some areas. Now, the aspect of, Fang's secondary rework, Rydia and her LD, those are examples of things that came too little too late, because the constant comparison of those characters like those to the meta, it's should we really play this game because it's our meta is should we really play this game? Should we go with our favorites, or do we need to go with meta? It's really sad for me to say that. And I don't care how much negativity this video gets, but I actually have to say it. And it's just so heartbreaking. It's you got some questionable decisions. The development team not really keeping up with major issues, with Android operating servers, or the 64-bit compliance, which should be coming up soon if it hasn't already. It's just I really cannot trust this development team anymore. I really don't know what else to say to that. And that's where I'm going to end this video. With Wolvie here, signing off. I will catch you all on the flip side.